that.
Yeah, definitely. Now we're going to move on now. Next topic, we're going to talk about the legal options. Now this is going to get good. This is going to get really good. The legal options that Disney and other theme parks have in regards to kind of, I don't want to say retaliate, but I guess to fight back against these, unfair guidelines. Dre, I want to start with you. Legal recourse. What are your thoughts on this? What can Disney and Universal and all these companies do in regards to this?
Well, this is quite an interesting issue. I had suspected that Disney had a contingency which included a legal option. And the reason I suspected this is a couple of reasons. One, the direct language included in Josh D'Amaro's statement, actually putting the onus on California in part for their decisions to lay off as many as they did. And the public opinion. So we just looking at case law, it appears to me that judges are very much swayed by public opinion. And it was very interesting how just after the guidelines were rumored, you started to see a slew of articles from a lot of big names come out and make Disney's case for them in the court of public opinion. And to shift the public dialogue from, shift it from Disneyland open equals death to, no, this has far more wide-reaching implications and it's not as black and white as it appears. And saying if Florida can be open, then Disneyland can be open. It's an obvious argument, but this is what they were going through on a national scale, not just limited to California as we had previously seen. So it suggested to me, they're really, if this doesn't work out in their favor, they might be going the legal option. Now there is a case going on right now, and I believe it's Gallagher et al. Versus Newsom. And what they are saying is they're going into it and saying, look, California is simply being unreasonable with their lockdown provisions and the emergency powers as absorbed by Newsom. And they argue it from more of an elections perspective. But okay. I wanted to read you Gallagher, who is involved in this case, and what they had proceedings yesterday in terms of what the governor's position on when it came to emergency powers as collected during this time. And I just wanted to read you an excerpt, and I wanted to get your guys' reaction to it. So
okay.
Gallagher tweeted, "Was shocking to hear that the governor's attorneys argue that in an emergency, all power of the state is vested in the governor alone, including lawmaking powers, arguing that we cease to be a representative republic with three branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. Further, they argued that during an emergency, his decisions cannot be, quote, second-guessed by anyone, including the legislature and the courts. Therefore, they said his decisions to change, and they say election laws, overnight without the legislature, was right simply because he made it. Wow. Imagine the implications of what the governor is arguing was true. He can make law, and you have no right to influence that decision. You can send him a letter, maybe petition him like a king, but his decision is final and cannot be questioned. Imagine the implications for civil liberties of such a system. Our history is filled with instances of human rights abuses when one man is given unlimited powers of the government." He goes on, but he believes he is king. He believes that what I am doing is right. I can unilaterally have the authority over my subjects, being the 40 million in California currently. And by executive decree, I'm going to set mandates and provisions for the entire citizenry of California to follow. And if you like it, too bad.
Wow. Yeah. And, I joked earlier about King Newsom, but really wasn't too far off. That
is exactly it. Folks, if you remember in Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars Episode 3, when Chancellor Palpatine uses the emergency powers granted to him to declare that the Republic be destroyed and be usurped by the Empire and declare himself emperor, that is essentially what we're seeing. So if this feels off to you, it should, because it is.
Yeah, it definitely given off Star Wars vibes. I mean, even that whole thing with Anakin, his quest to prevent people from dying. Like no one wants anyone to die. Obviously, I don't want anyone to die in a car accident, but I'm not going to sit here and advocate to ban cars because it'll bring the death rate down from car accidents down to zero. We still need to function as a society. And this whole notion of like, well, just shut everything down, lock it down, stay in your home, don't communicate with anybody, because then we'll prevent anyone from dying is kind of ridiculous. And it's extremely authoritarian.
It's an extremely ridiculous standard. It is the definition of authoritarianism or even tyranny. And don't worry, we are doing this for your best interests to keep you safe. George, what do you have to say on it?
For me, yeah, I'm with you guys on that all the way. And I kind of get a little disgruntled when someone also says, oh, well, this will all go away. This will all go back to normal once a vaccine comes out. What I don't understand is if you look at the notion of a vaccine right now, there are many different factors of a flu vaccine. There's a different one each year depending on which strain comes out. There are people who get the flu vaccine. There are people who do not. The flu is still there, regardless if you are one who gets a flu vaccine or you don't. There's actually people that are compromised if they get the flu vaccine. There's people that aren't. I'm one that if I actually get the flu vaccine, I'm down for 3 weeks. I am like completely out of commission. I'm more better off without it. My wife and son, it works for them. So when a person says, oh, everything will start going back to normal with a vaccine, COVID is out there. It is now in our existence, and it's not going to go poof like the fairy godmother goes bibbidi bobbidi boo, and it's gone. So, I mean, as far as that goes, but as far as like with the legal status, I mean, a group of people already did a protest, a peaceful protest right outside of Disneyland. What was it, several days ago, I believe?
Yes, I believe it's Saturday.
Okay. So that is already stirring the notion, not even just for Disneyland, but for everyone that pass on Catella and Harbor Boulevard and even those businesses. I mean, Disneyland and the city of Anaheim were never on good terms as far as getting stuff done within that proximity. But I think with all those businesses now, they are really starting to see that without Disneyland, their businesses are suffering. They're absolutely – no one is going to go on Harbor Boulevard to grab a Big Mac or just to grab a Big Mac.
Right.
So what were you going to say, Vash?
Oh, well, yes. I was just going to give people context to the reason why George is bringing up the vaccine is because that's one of the standards by which Governor Newsom is actually operating on, that when a vaccine is actually imminent or when it actually gets distributed, then things go back to normal. He's actually said this. Now, recently, in collaboration with Governor Cuomo of New York, at the same time, they're wanting to implement a task force that will independently review a vaccine once it gets approved by the FDA. Understand, folks, he has now controlled the issue, the potential ways to fight it, and the potential solution to such issue. Unilateral and full control. Again, this is quite disturbing, and if you have any ideas that maybe a vaccine be implemented and maybe they go down to yellow, well, then that puts a kink in that chain as well. Also, there have been some the Orange County, I believe, health official just recently came out and said to get to yellow, even with a vaccine, at the earliest, you're getting to yellow in Orange County with Disneyland open, whatever restrictions are past then, to about, I believe it was early summer. That's as early summer 2021. That's as early as, even with the vaccine, that they can get to there. And without any impositions put out until then. That's as soon as it can come. So really the legal option is the only option available. If people want to get back to work for Disney, if these businesses want to restore their businesses with Disney being open, and for us to even visit Disneyland, that is the soonest we can get to it. And I'll go into it a little bit of maybe precedent a little bit later.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I think honestly, it came down to there's no other options. There really isn't. There's no even sitting down for a board meeting and saying, okay, well, let's compromise. Let's do that's gone. That ship has sailed. There's nothing. And I think Disney has been more than patient enough to wait and see and wait it out and try to figure something out. I mean, Iger even left Newsom's board and he didn't even shed a tear.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that. Go ahead.
The legal option is the only way. I mean, and I think they're like, I think from what I'm understanding, and Vash, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Cedar Fair who pursued legal actions against Ohio in regards to a similar
Yes.
situation. Is that correct?
Yes, they are. Yes, they did pursue Ohio over that scenario. I don't actually know what the outcome of that was, but they were allowed to open. But yes, they did pursue the legal route when it came to Ohio specifically. Apparently, the Ohio governor he also believes that the daddy government should be able to run your life during this time period. So that did happen as well.
So hopefully Disneyland, we get, if they do pursue legal action, hopefully we get a similar outcome where they are eventually able to open. Maybe the legal action will be enough to put a fire under Newsom's behind to get him to be like, all right, you know what, okay, fine, we'll negotiate something a little more reasonable.
I've been looking at Newsom right now with his status. I don't even think it's going to be okay. Well, if you don't do this, we're going to do this. I think literally it will happen when the actual lawsuit or what have you
Right.
is actually in place. And I think that's going to have to come from the Disney themselves. It's going to have to come from over almost the 30,000 cast members that got affected by this, and just the residents of people of California in general. And I think everyone is just going to have to band together from separate entities into one that are just going to come after Newsom to where he's kind of backed in a corner, so to speak.
But essentially, yes, this will have to be a mixture of public opinion and legal recourse. And on that front, I think this is why Iger might have been silent. I suspect that he might have had instincts where this might have been going the legal route. And again, whatever you say, I can will be used against you. I think he wanted to take a more neutral position when it came to all this, because maybe the legal route was being pursued even at that time. What's likely to happen is a class action. So they have I believe it's like the California Theme Parks Association, or what was that group called that they're working with right now? Eric Guerrero is a part of it.
Oh yeah. Is it? Oh, it's CASA, I think, or something to that effect.
It's something. It's essentially it's the consortium of theme parks that operate in California. Right. I believe that it's going to be a class action lawsuit emanating from that entity, representing all the theme parks being affected, and that would include the smaller ones as well, because those stipulations or restrictions simply are untenable as well. But we have some legal precedent for this. Unfortunately, there are no overarching Supreme Court decisions on this. Usually, when it comes to the Supreme Court level, these governors are citing Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which is pretty much almost 100 years old now. But that's what gives the executive position unique powers in terms of an emergency. It's bad case law if you go into it. If you want to go into that specifically, but I believe when it comes to Michigan. The Governor Whitmer's orders over there were struck down in the Michigan Supreme Court. Apparently, they have an emergency power provision which only gives the governor there 45 days in order for the executive powers over there, and then it must be reapplied. Apparently, that wasn't followed. They struck that down. That could be cited potentially. There was a Pennsylvania decision. I believe it was Butler versus Wolf,
Yes.
which was the Pennsylvania.
I'm from Pennsylvania, so yeah, Butler, from the very beginning, like when they were starting to open up into the different phases of like yellow. Butler was one that wasn't even looked upon, and they went for Governor Wolf.
Right, and there was a decision that was in a lower court, but it was Judge Stickman, which wrote a pretty indicting decision, honestly, in his opinion brief. I did cite that in my thread, actually, because it was quite interesting. And what the notion was, well, look, you have non-essential businesses cited. You didn't actually come up with a definition of non-essential businesses, you ran with that. You arbitrarily applied standards to, maybe in the case of the Butler v. Wolf decision, you applied standards to have large retail chain operations open, like Walmart and Target, selling the same exact thing as some of the other businesses there. This speaks to the arbitrariness of maybe smaller theme parks to larger theme parks that they might be able to cite. And it just, I mean, if you read his Stickman's opinions on it, I mean, it goes into all of this in great detail. And I won't get into it too much here, but you can cite the arbitrariness of some of the Governor Newsom's decision making on this, and then you have the essentially the Supreme Court decision ruling in the favor of the casinos in Las Vegas, and over the religious gatherings that are there. So they can cite that. Apparently, Gorsuch wrote a decision saying we have essentially placed Caesar's Palace over Calvary Chapel. Well, if that's the case, then theme parks are definitely allowed to open, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there are some legal bits that you can go through. MiceChat has a good post about this, about maybe what the legal options could be. They cite provisions in, I believe, let me just see here. They believe they have a lawyer speaking on this, and it says any legal action by Disney or other theme parks would challenge the constitutionality of the governor's guidelines. Business challenges to the lockdowns typically rely upon the provisions in the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, as well as sometimes the 5th Amendment. First, when a law attempts to treat similarly situated businesses differently, the 14th Amendment's Equal Protections Clause requires that the law have at least a rational basis for the different treatment. Second, the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause prevents the enforcement of a law if it's so standardless as to invite arbitrary enforcement. The Fifth Amendment's Takings Clause prevents private property from being seized without just compensation. Again, when you close down a business, you're essentially seizing that business for yourself. Well, that should have due process attached to that. But specifically the 14th, the equal clause, you're saying that small theme parks should be treated differently than larger theme parks. What is your basis for this? Because if the operational standards of smaller theme parks should apply to larger theme parks equally, right, no matter how large they be. You have zoos, museums, home theaters, not home theaters, but theaters open that are malls, indoor malls open that are far more dangerous, at least according to the science, when it comes to COVID-19. And you're treating, which, by the way, theme parks are they're just a collective of all those things. And you're treating this differently. Why? Knott's Berry Farm, Universal. They're going to go forward with the process of having the theme parks open for food and retail, but you can't go on attractions, even though the CDC has specifically said that attractions are low risk as long as theme park attendants don't actually help you get into the restraint system.